Hi, welcome to Veronica Live. I'm here today with my regular co-host Tracy, and we're going to have a really special show today. Tracy is actually a breast cancer survivor, and I didn't know that she was going through this until recently. She posted on Facebook after her experience that she had gone through this. Tracy, welcome.
Thanks. Hi, how are you?
Welcome. Just to let our listeners know, 1 in 8 women will be diagnosed with breast cancer.
Yes.
There's 250,000 cases a year. It's the second most common cancer that is diagnosed in our country. And, most of us have friends, like myself, Tracy, who has gone through this. So tell us, how did you find out that you had this?
Well, I've always been pretty good about doing the self-checks. And as I've gotten older, I've done them even more. But here, one morning I got up and I was about to get in the shower and I was checking myself and I felt a lump. And it was pretty good size. And I'd been missing it, I guess.
Wow.
So it startled me, to be quite honest. It was a pretty good size. I mean, it was definitely there. You couldn't mistake it for, something else.
So when was this? A year ago?
That was in April of 2016.
Okay.
So that morning, I told my husband, hey, I just found a lump. And he said, you need to call now.
Okay.
So I think it was actually, that was a Friday. And I kind of let it sit over the weekend. I think I was afraid to face it a little bit. But on Monday, I faced down the telephone and called and got an appointment. And a week later, I got in to see my provider in the women's clinic. And she, because she confirmed that it was there, of course. But at that point, just feeling it, you can't tell, of course, what it is. But she thought it was, perhaps a cyst. So a few days later, I was in for a ultrasound and a mammogram because they call that a diagnostic. A diagnostic mammogram is when you have an ultrasound afterwards. It can diagnose a cyst or other things that need to be biopsied. At that point, I was laying on the thing in the office, and the technician was ultrasounding, and she went and got the radiologist, and he looked and he said, "Okay, well, get dressed and we'll talk." And
oh
right
my
then and there, I
gosh.
kind of knew what it was.
So were you not freaking out? Because I know whenever something like this, happens, I go to WebMD and then, by the next day I'm already dying. So
yeah,
how
Dr.
are you
Google
not...
is the worst thing you could do for yourself.
I'm
Don't
trying to give it
ever
up.
listen to Dr. Google.
I'm trying to give it up because apparently, I cut my knee and I'm dying the next day from it.
Yeah, well,
so.
if you have a headache and you Google it, it's brain cancer. It's a tumor. Well, at that point, I was kind of, I think, in disbelief.
Okay.
It was kind of like, huh. So I went in and I talked to the doctor, the radiologist, and he said, well, I'm concerned, so let's get you in for a biopsy and have it checked. So I went and made my little appointment for the biopsy, and of course it was going to be 3 weeks. And I thought, oh my goodness, that's horrible. So I went back to work, and the ladies at work said, oh, well, the doctor's going to wait 3 weeks. Don't worry, that means he doesn't see it as an emergency. So, of course, half an hour after that, I got a call from the doctor saying, hey, I've got an appointment for tomorrow for you.
Oh, good.
We're not going to wait 3 weeks.
So had you, at this point, already had a mammogram, a few of them already, or
yes.
not yet? Okay.
I've always had mammograms. When I've gone, I've had them several times. And in the past, I've been told that I have very dense breast tissue.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, one of the radiologists told me it was so dense that there could have been a golf ball size malignancy and he wouldn't have been able to see it.
Wow.
So I did have a baseline MRI at that point, but it was 5 years prior. Generally speaking, they don't do MRIs, even with dense breast tissue. There hadn't been a reason to do one. So at that point, who knows how long I'd had this thing growing.
Wow.
Yeah, but the dense breast tissue is a big deal, and that's why the diagnostic mammogram is a good thing, because you're using an ultrasound as a secondary way to find something.
So you make the appointment, and so then what happened? You go in.
Well, So the doctor called, and I was in the next day. Of course, my husband took me, and I had what they call a just basically a biopsy, a needle biopsy, where they numb you up and they use an ultrasound to find it, and they take samples from it, and then you wait. And of course, a few days later, he called me and said, yes, it is breast cancer. And that was a Friday.
It's always on a Friday with you. What's going on?
It is, I know, right? So yeah. So
Oh,
I get
great!
To think about it
Back to Dr. Google WebMD. Oh my goodness.
The funny part of it was, though, we were supposed to go out for dinner that evening, and I sat there and I thought, well, I don't really want to go out to dinner, and I thought, no, darn it, I'm going out. I am going to eat dinner with my family.
And I'm having the biggest
myself.
glass of wine.
I am not going to struggle and weep and lay in bed and be
wow, you're
feel
so
sorry
strong.
for myself. Of course, I did that later. But the first night, at least, I did manage to get my butt out and go out to eat.
When did you find out, what kind of cancer it was?
Okay, so at that point, that first biopsy was just very small tissue or tissue samples. So they send it to another lab after they've done the initial diagnosis, and then they do what they call tumor markers. So the tumor markers are estrogen, progesterone, and then something called HER2. Mine was positive for estrogen and progesterone. That means that those are the things that made my tumor grow. HER2 is another one. It was negative for that. If you're negative for all three, that's what's known as triple-negative breast cancer. And until more recently, there wasn't a lot of treatments for that. That was a really hard one to treat. They now have a lot more treatments. Mine fell into the most popular, if you can use that word, the most prevalent, I guess we'll say, type of breast cancer, the ER positive or estrogen receptor positive. So that's I found out a few weeks later. Okay. Now, what you don't find out at that point, and you find out later, is what stage you are. Okay, so there's stage 1 through stage 4.
Right, that was a question
stage 4
being, for you.
Yeah, stage 4 being the metastasized type, where it's in your bones or your liver or your brain or that type of thing, much more serious. You don't find that out until after surgery.
So you had all of this, and it came back still saying, what it was. You still when did you? So what was next? The surgery? How fast did that happen?
That was okay. So let's see. I think the biopsy was April 19th, and I found out April 22nd or something along those lines. That was indeed breast cancer. I didn't have the surgery until May 23rd. So I had a whole month where I had to wait and worry, which was not stressful. Good for me because I tend to, to Google and find too much information out.
Right.
But I had a lumpectomy, so they removed the lump. I did not have a mastectomy. Part of the reason for that is they have a grade on the type of tumor you have. Mine was grade 1 out of 3. Meaning a slower growing type.
Okay,
and
also
because of the size, it ended up being 2.5 centimeters, so about an inch was the longest dimension of it.
Okay.
Because of the size, I didn't have to have chemo first to shrink it. Some people do have that situation, so they were able to do a lumpectomy on me. I had an MRI to on both breasts to see if anything else needed to be removed. And then on May 23rd, 2016, I had a lumpectomy and a procedure called a sentinel node biopsy. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
Okay. So one of the first places that cancer cells spread are to the axillary lymph nodes that are in your armpit.
Okay.
So a sentinel node biopsy is where they inject you with a little bit of a nuclear material, and then they track where that goes with a kind of like a CT scan machine. They're able, and then a blue dye, and the surgeon is able to find those first couple of nodes in your armpit, and they take out a couple. They're called the sentinel node, the first node that the cells would spread to. They removed 2 nodes from me, and then everything, the tumor, the tissue, a sample of your skin.
So all of that happened on surgery day?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And they take all of that and send it in for the pathology. And so they have 2 pathologists. They have the one he was at the Army hospital, and then they send it out to an independent lab so that everything is verified.
So what were you going through mentally at this point?
Excuse me. At that point, I was a complete and utter mess. It was to me. It was just absolutely
you just
terrifying.
Don't know still, or
right? There was so much you don't know.
Okay.
You don't know what stage you are. You don't know if it's anywhere else in your body. You don't know what chemo is going to do for you. You don't know, if radiation is going to burn your skin. There's so much that is unknown, and waiting for the results of that to come back. You're worried about those lymph nodes, because if those lymph nodes were positive, that indicates spread.
Okay.
And therefore they might have had to go in and perform an axillary dissection, which is taking out a lot more lymph nodes.
And how long did you end up waiting to hear back?
Oh, that's a story in itself. I ended up waiting 2 weeks. My surgeon went on leave. The system that has all the results in it went down for several days.
Gosh.
They didn't call me. I ended up calling them and telling them, if somebody doesn't call me back, I'm calling the surgical inspector general. I totally did. I went totally postal on the person on the phone. Yeah, I was
so
very
strong.
frustrated.
I mean, wow.
Yeah, it was bad. It was really bad. There was a series of silly mistakes that they made.
I would have been so stressed.
At that point, it came back, and they again verified that it was estrogen and progesterone positive, HER2 negative. And then my lymph nodes, out of the 2 lymph nodes, one was negative, and one was positive for cancer cells, but they called it a micrometastasis, which meant just a very small amount.
Okay.
So it seems that they caught it before it really started to spread.
Wow.
Now, that doesn't mean it doesn't mean that you don't have what they call circulating tumor cells in your body, because it can also travel through your blood and other means. So that's what chemo is for.
So you got a crash course in cancer and terminology and.
It's like another language.
Had this been in your family before?
Well, my grandmother had breast cancer, but she was in her late 80s when that happened, and no one else. I believe I'm the only one really in my family that's had it.
Wow.
And and nobody knows what actually causes it, of course. You can say diet, you can say drinking, you can say toxins in the environment. There's so many things that it could be. The only thing that I can trace mine to, because of the estrogen and progesterone positive nature of it, those are the things that made it grow. I was on some hormone replacement therapy for a short period of time until another provider decided it was too much of a risk for breast cancer.
Okay, wow.
So it's possible that that's what initiated its growth.
Could have triggered it, okay.
I'll never actually know.
So after you get all the results back, then what happens? Is that when did you have to have, you said you didn't have to have chemo?
No, this is another mistake was made. I went to my oncologist once I got my pathology back, and she decided at that point that I would have 4 treatments of what's known as TC chemo, Taxotere and cyclophosphamide. Cyclophosphamide is made from mustard gas. Isn't that fun?
Wow.
And Taxotere is the one that you see the commercials for alopecia. The type that causes some people alopecia, and there's a lawsuit going on. So that was fun too, just to think that my hair may never come back. I ended up at that point, I had to have what they call a port put in. A port is like a device that they put the needles in, so they're not having to constantly access your veins, and that keeps them from blowing your veins out.
Okay.
That port was a lifesaver. You could do blood draws through it. I ended up in the hospital a couple times. It was an amazing thing. I got the port put in. I had my first treatment of TC chemo, and at that point, there was a delay in another test that my surgeon had ordered. It was called an oncotype. For the estrogen positive tumors, they do this test called an oncotype. It tells you the likelihood that your tumor will respond to chemo, or that you will actually need chemo, and the likelihood that it will come back.
Oh, wow.
It ended up that my oncotype score was very low, which meant that chemo might have a limited impact on me. So it wasn't really a cut and dry